I've kind of had this video idea in my head for a little while. If the title didn't make it clear, it's about cats in the House of Night. And I had an inkling about like talking about this for a while, but it wasn't until I think I mentioned this in my video about Stephen. I'd gone through all the books and I like compiled a list of all the names in the House of Night series. And in doing so, I also noted specifically which names were like pets and what kinds of pets they were and who those pets belonged to. And that made the topic of cats even more apparent to me as like something to discuss. For some context, in the world of the House of Night, cats choose their owners, and that's a really important thing in vampire culture, is being chosen by a cat. It's not quite like having a familiar, but it is seen as like a very, very important bond, to the point that in Untamed, Aphrodite has not been chosen by a cat yet. And this is a source of some like a little bit of shame, definitely makes her feel like she doesn't quite belong. And it's like it's a source of hardship for her. And so in that book, when she is chosen by a cat, that's like a really big deal, especially because at that point in the series, she had just lost her mark and was like kind of sort of human again and wasn't really sure where she fit. So being chosen by a cat was an indication that yes, in fact, she does belong with vampires. With that being a piece of like established lore that was indicated very early in the series, like early in the first book, one would expect that every major character pretty much would have a cat established at some point. And if someone doesn't have a cat mentioned in relation to them, that there's like a reason for it, or there'd be some kind of commentary on it. So to start, also, I'm sorry for the light. I don't know what the light's doing right now, but so I don't know. It's hard to tell on the screen if this is good or bad lighting, but I don't know. Maybe I'll close that curtain a little. Hold on. Is that a little better? It's a little better. Anyway, sorry for the interruption. I'm now going to read through all of the cats and their owners. And then I'm going to go over all of the characters who don't have cats. So bear with me. Nala, in the original series, Nala is Zoe's cat. There's also some lip service paid to the idea that she's also Stevie Ray's cat, but we'll get to that. Cameron is Damien's cat. Beelzebub was shared by Shawnee and Aaron until Aaron like went dark, and then it was just Shawnee's cat. Skylar was originally Neferet's cat, and then was very briefly Aurochs's cat, and then at the very end of the series seems to be Stark's cat. Wolverine was Lauren Blake's cat. Nefertiti was Darius's. Maleficent is Aphrodite's. Shadowfax is Dragon's cat. Guinevere is Anastasia's cat. Lenobia does have a cat, but it's never named. It's just mentioned exactly once in the entire series. Skyatch has Mab. Neferet had two other cats in her backstory named Chloe and Claire. And then in the Otherworld series, there's this one-off character named Xena who mentions having a cat named Peta. And Kevin is chosen by other Nala. So that's all of the cats established in the series. There's like a couple cats mentioned, but they're not connected to vampires. They're just random cats. So the characters who don't have cats, and notably, this isn't every character who doesn't have a cat established for them. This is just characters that are major enough that it is noticeable that they don't have a cat established. Shaylin, no cat. Never any mention of a cat in relation to Shaylin. I know I said Stevie Ray is kind of Nala's, but not really. It's just that Stevie Ray and Zoe are roommates and Nala sleeps on Stevie Ray's bed sometimes. That's as far as it goes. They're not sharing Nala the way that Aaron and Shawnee were sharing Beelzebub, because it's specifically noted that Beelzebub choosing both Shawnee and Aaron is really weird. And for Zoe to remark on that, that has to mean that didn't happen with her and Stevie Ray. Otherwise, like, she would comment on that, right? You could argue that Stark and Jack, for the majority of the series, don't have cats because they are both, they own Duchess. Stark originally is Duchess's owner. Duchess is a dog. And then when Stark dies, he comes back, it's fine. When he dies, Jack takes over caring for Duchess. But Damien is also kind of Duchess's caretaker, and he has a cat. And also Stark does get a cat at the very end of the original series while also still being Duchess's owner. So having another pet does not supersede being chosen by a cat. Notably, Lenobia also owns a whole bunch of horses, but she still has a cat. So Jack not having a cat established for him is notable. Then there's Eric, never has a cat, and he's like a pretty prominent character throughout the series. Cramisha doesn't have a cat, Shaurus doesn't have a cat, and normally I wouldn't note Shaurus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right, but the fact that Skyatch has a cat established for her, but Shaurus doesn't, I think is notable because they occupy a pretty similar amount of page time and importance in the series. So I just think it's notable that he doesn't have a cat. Thanatos doesn't have a cat. Dallas doesn't have a cat. Nicole doesn't have a cat. She's less important, but she is Shaylin's girlfriend. So I think it's notable that neither of them have cats. And Casey doesn't have a cat. Casey is not a very major character, really. She's established in Forgotten of the Otherworld series, but she's supposed to be an insert for Kristen cast. And so I think it's notable that a write-in for one of the authors still doesn't have a cat. So why does this matter? The intention or the potential here is sort of, it's just a little world building element. It's something for readers to attach to, the idea that their cat chooses them, and the idea that like being chosen a cat means you belong in vampire society. Like obviously for young adult readers, that would be kind of a thing to latch onto, the same way that like, you know, the Wizard Boy series with its houses and stuff was a thing to latch onto, or Hunger Games with districts, or I don't know, Divergent with whatever those things are called. It's a thing for readers to latch onto as a way to feel connected to and relate into the story itself, is the idea of cats being part of vampirism in a way. It's also supposed to attach to the feminism of the series, because there's lip service paid to the idea that like men hate cats because they don't understand them, and that's why they were associated with witches or something. I don't know. It doesn't actually make sense, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with superstition around cats. But it's supposed to like fit in with the broader aesthetic and lore and sort of not politics, but the theological framing of the series, essentially. And so like, even though it seems like a minor detail, oversights in it do, like, it's part of the broader picture of there's so many things in the series that shouldn't be a big deal, but because they weren't handled with the amount of consistency or care that they needed, they become a bigger deal. This being a world where cats are supposed to be kind of ubiquitous, and the cat chooses the vampire, being chosen by a cat is part of being, you know, a part of vampire society. To not be chosen by a cat marks you as a bit of an outcast. And like, there's so much that could have been done with that, especially in a world where there's such a high risk of rejecting the change. For a character to not be chosen by a cat and then reject the change, are there superstitions attached to that? Are there people who go, well, obviously they were going to reject the change, a cat never chose them? Or if someone is chosen by a cat and then does reject the change, what does that look like? What is the practice and culture around that? Because the adult vampires might not care about the fledgling dying, that's a whole thing in the early books, but they would certainly care about the cat. And it's indicated in the series that cats go through intense mourning when their fledgling or vampire dies. And so like, what does that look like? What, you know, services or interventions are in place to care for these cats? Or, you know, cats are kind of allowed to roam free and do their own thing. Is there a trend of, this is really dark, but it is established in the series, cats killing themselves when their vampire or fledgling dies? That is the thing that canonically happens in the series. So is that like an ongoing problem? Is that a concern? Or like, how does that work? I just feel like that's an oversight on the author's part to not examine that. And the fact that it goes unexamined, and also there's such a trend of important characters not having cats and it never being commented on, ends up leaving this kind of hollow spot in the world building and the lore, because this is supposed to be really important to vampires. But all these vampires and fledglings don't have it, and no one really seems to care, except in literally one example. And I think in terms of like ways this could have been done better, again, as I said, having some sort of superstition around not being chosen by a cat, or, you know, some sort of, you know, intervention service for cats that have lost their vampire. Like, what do they do to try to protect that cat? But also, I could see it being a thing of waiting until fledglings are a certain amount of time through the change before they start introducing them to cats, because cats roam free on campus, but those are cats that the fledglings and vampires already own, or like cats that have already chosen a fledgling or vampire. So there could be some idea to, at a certain point in the change, you get to go visit a cat shelter, or cats are brought into the school to see if they choose someone, or something like that. And that would feel like, obviously there'd still be random instances of a cat wanders onto campus and chooses someone, as with Zoe and Nala, but there could have been some sort of cultural process to being chosen by a cat. And when we meet, say, the red fledglings who have rejected the change, there could be something about a lot of them rejecting the change before they got a chance to possibly be chosen by a cat because they were too young. And then maybe after rejecting the change, because early into, like, before the sacrifice is made to save their humanity, I'm pretty sure, yeah, animals don't like they're not red fledglings at that point, they're just undead fledglings. It's confusing. Animals don't like the undead fledglings. And so it would have been interesting to explore that, of dying before they were chosen by a cat and then coming back as this undead abomination that animals hate, and then having their humanity restored and being a new kind of, you know, fledgling or vampire, but still feeling like maybe they don't belong because they don't know if a cat will ever choose them in this state, and then exploring some of them actually being chosen by cats, especially Stevie Ray. Why doesn't Stevie Ray have a cat? That to me is one of the biggest oversights, is Stevie Ray not having a cat, because she's such a major character. She's a POV character from book 6 onwards. She has POV chapters in every single book in the original series for the latter half of the series. So to not give her, I'm pretty sure it's in every single book, to not give her a cat is like really glaring. And it's a huge missed opportunity for exploring the implications of rejecting the change and coming back red, but also of what it's like to not be chosen by a cat, and like what kind of systems could vampires have in place to deal with fledglings and vampires rejecting the change, if they have, well, not vampires rejecting the change, but fledglings rejecting the change and vampires dying when they are chosen by a cat. Like, what happens? And that could even be part of it too, is any cat that their, you know, fledgling or vampire has died, after a certain mourning period, that cat is presented to fledglings of a certain age to see if the cat will choose someone new, kind of thing. That's kind of my thoughts on that. It's mostly just like, it shows a poor level of attention to detail. Again, the same as with the Sons of Erebus warrior named Stephen. It's a lack of attention to detail. It's a lack of care in the world building, and it's just not, it's not really delving into the heart of anything. There's a lot of things that exist in this series for like the aesthetic or the vibe or the cool factor kind of thing, but a lot of it isn't meaningfully explored, and it's a shame because some of it could be very interesting to explore, and it could lend, even something as simple as having a cat could be a source of depth and nuance and heart for the series. There could be a strong emotional thread through that, and without even having to do a whole lot with it. You would only need a few details about it here and there throughout the series. You wouldn't have to have huge subplots about it. And again, it's a lack of attention to detail, a lack of care for consistency, and a lack of thought to overarching themes and messages in the series. And yeah, just a very big missed opportunity. As a cat lover, disappointed. Anyway, that is all for this video. I wasn't entirely sure where I was going with it when I sat down. I just knew I wanted to talk about why do so many characters not have cats? What are you doing? But we got there. We got to the core of the concept eventually. Anyway, that's enough rambling for me. If you watched this far, please leave a cat emoji of some variety. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye!